A presentation of South Carolina ETV. Funds for the following program were provided by the Pew Charitable Trusts, the Literature Program of the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
As we go with you to the sun, as we walk in the dawn, turn our eyes eastward, and let the prophecy come true, and let the prophecy come true. Great God, Martin, what a morning it will be one day.
Philadelphia. Poet Sonia Sanchez lives here in a large house in the Germantown neighborhood. Sanchez is the author of more than a dozen books of poetry, essays, and plays. Her book of poems, Homegirls and Hand Grenades, won a 1985 American Book Award. Sanchez settled in Philadelphia in 1976 after a childhood of hardship in Alabama and 3 decades of struggle in Harlem. She raised her 2 sons here and is now a tenured professor with a chair in English at Temple University.
I think because I have resided here that I have been able to produce the books that I have done.
A tragic event in 1985 forced Sonia Sanchez to re-examine her relationship to this city of brotherly love. A group of black political radicals known as MOVE were barricaded in a house on Osage Street against a siege by police. An explosive device was dropped on the roof of the building. The ensuing fire raged out of control, destroying an entire city block and killing several MOVE members, including children.
We did everything possible to negotiate and bring about a peaceful result. The MOVE members, however, wanted and desired to have a violent confrontation.
Living here in Philadelphia, how did that tragedy affect you?
I left out of here, I left Philadelphia to go to a place called Albany, Georgia, which has a fantastic history in this country. I went out for a week's residency. We were finished with school. I went there to do 2 lectures and 2 workshops and 1 poetry reading. And that was it. An easy time on many levels, okay? And by the time I got there, and by the time I awakened the next morning, MOVE had happened that Sunday. And I gave a lecture, a morning lecture to a packed house, and people didn't really hear me. They were like staring like this at me because they said, "This is Sonia Sanchez from Philadelphia." The hands went up immediately like, "What kind of people live in Philadelphia?" And I said, "There's some very decent people in Philadelphia. I'm not speaking for the politicians or the policemen, but I am indeed speaking for some people who live there, and I know who regret this." And I said, within the day, the conclusion of this day, there will be people who will say just how sorry they are and what this is about. And then, of course, on the television, when they asked all of the politicians and people, no one said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry," whatever. But you got a reaction like, "Yeah, these people deserve this." And I cried during the midnight hours, and I cried, and I went back in to do my workshops, and then the conversation came up again, period. I said, well, I think by the time I got home, and by the time I had spoken to my children, who also at some point had tears because going into a classroom, people kept saying, well, these are people with dreads, these are people who don't do what they're supposed to do, these are people who don't conform, these are people who keep all the dirt in front of the house, these are the people who offend their neighbors by making noise and building things up, protecting their houses, these are people whose children don't go to school, these are people who eat raw meat, these are people who disrupt, these are people who keep a bullhorn on top of the roof and keep people from sleeping, these are people, these are people, these are people, these are people who, these are people, whatever. But that was the point, they were people. And in the midst of all that, people dropped a bomb on a civilian territory, which tells us exactly the kind of thing that can happen. Are you saying to me that we're at war with each other in this country? Or is the message to be given to people that if we speak out and become nonconformists, that certainly we can be killed? Or are you saying within a black neighborhood, anything goes? Because I think that is part of it too.
And when you create a poem of the moment, such as your poems about the MOVE tragedy, as one moves further away in time from that moment, and as the collective memory of those events in 1985 fade, what impact could you hope the poem to have, or do you think that impact is different?
Well, I think that the immediate impact when I read is that people cringed immediately because they didn't want to hear it. By golly, by gee, don't write this. And then as the pain of what had happened, as the city basically began to deal with that pain, then let's say 3 years later when you read that poem in a gathering here in Philadelphia, people understood the poem more. It was not an attack on them. They understood the poem and they began to integrate the poem in terms like this is part of our history, you know, and it must be recorded in some fashion. Not just the report, but also the poetry that records something that is terrible, that is whatever. So therefore we as people who live in Philadelphia must never let this happen again, you see. So it becomes part of history. It becomes an historical document also too. Elegy for MOVE and Philadelphia. 1. Philadelphia, a disguised southern city, squatting in the eastern paths of colleges, cathedrals, and cowboys. Philadelphia, a phalanx of parsons and auctioneers, modern gladiators, erasing the delirium of death from their shields while houses burn out of control. 2. Come on, girl. Hurry on down to Osage Street, they're roasting in the fire. Smell the dreadlocks and black skins roasting in the fire. Come on, newsmen and TV men. Hurry on down to Osage Street, and when you have chloroformed the city and after you have stitched up your words, hurry on downtown for sanctuary in taverns and corporations, and the blood is not yet dry. 3. How does one scream in thunder? 4. They're combing the morning for shadows and screams tongue-tied without faces. Look over there, one eye escaping from its skin, and our heartbeats slow down to a drawl, and the kingfisher comes out from his downtown capital, and the pinstripe general re-enlists his tongue for combat, and the police come like twin seasons of drought and flood. They are combing the city for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 5. How does one city scream in thunder? 6. Hide us, O Lord. Deliver us from our nakedness. Exile us from our laughter. Give us this day our rest from seduction, peeling us down to our veins. And the tower was like no other. Amen. And the streets escape under the cover of darkness. Amen. And the voices called out from their wounds. Amen. And the fire circumcised the city. Amen. 7. Who anointed the city with napalm, I say, who giveth the city in holy infanticide. 8. Beyond the mornings and afternoons and deaths detonating the city, beyond the tourist roadhouses, trading lobotomies, there is a glimpse of earth, this prodigal earth. Beyond edicts and commandments commissioned by Puritans, there are people navigating the breath of hurricanes. Beyond concerts and football and mummers strutting their sequin processionals, there is this earth, this country, this city, this people, collecting skeletons from waiting rooms, lying in wait for honor and peace one day.
Sonia Sanchez was born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1934. Her father, Wilson Driver, was a drummer in a jazz band that toured the so-called Chitlin circuit of the Deep South in the 1930s. When Sonia was still an infant, her mother died giving birth to twins.
My mother died when I was 1 year old, and so my grandmother, a grand old woman, came and picked me and my sister up and said to my father, "Don't worry, I'll take care of them." And she did until I was 6. And at her death, in fact, I found my grandmother. I was one of these terrible little children who was always in trouble, always dirty. You know, I mean, by that I mean they would send me outside and I played. And I came back in, the pigtails were loose, ribbons off, a scratch, a scar someplace. I have scars from the kind of foolish things I did outside. And I was ragged, you know, really, and the dress was torn or whatever. They used to dress us up in these little, nice little dresses and send you outside to play. Can you imagine? And I come back with things torn. And of course, the people would stand and say, "Oh, this girl just ain't gonna be a lady." And my grandmother would say, "Just let the girl be. She be all right. She'll stumble on gentleness one of these days." I'm not too sure I have stumbled on gentleness, but certainly I stumbled on something.
When did you begin to think of yourself as a poet?
After my grandmother died, I began to write poems. I entered strange houses. My grandmother taught me how to write words at 4 and how to read at 4. She'd set me down because I asked her, you know, I said, "Is this it?" And she said, "Okay, let me," and she just, I mean, no training, and I started to read at 4. I started to write at about 6 1/2. And I sit down and write these little ditties, and everyone said, "Oh, look, Sonia is writing a poem," because it rhymed. And no, everyone looked around and said, "Oh, a poem, right, and went on. It kept me alive. It kept me alive during a very hard time because I had lost my grandmother. And I laughed laughter from 1,000 corridors. And you turned, Mama, closed the door, chased me round the room until I crawled into a corner where your large body could not reach me. But your laughter pierced the little alcove where I sat laughing at the night, and your humming sprinkled my small space, your humming about your Jesus and how one day he was going to take you home. Because you died when I was 6, Mama, I never laughed like that again. Because you died without warning, Mama, my sister and I moved from family to stepmother to friend of the family. I never felt your warmth again. But I knew corners and alcoves and closets where I was pushed when some mad woman went out of control, where I sat for days while some woman raved in rhymes about unwanted children and work and not enough money or love. And I set out my childhood with stutters, and poems gather in my head like some winter storm, and the poems erased the stutters and pain, and the words loved me, and I loved them in return. My first real poem was about you, Mama, and death. My first real poem recited an alphabet of spit, splatting a white bus driver's face after he tried to push cousin Lucille off a bus, and she left Birmingham under the cover of darkness forever. My first real poem was about your child's white arms holding me up against death. My life flows from you, Mama. My style comes from a long line of Louises who picked me up in the night to keep me from wetting the bed, a long line of Sarahs who fed me and my sister and 14 other children from watery soups and beans and a lot of imagination, a long line of Lizzies who made me understand love, sharing, holding a child up to the stars, holding your tribe in a grip of love, a long line of black people holding each other up against silence. I still hear your humming, Mama. The color of your song calls me home. The color of your words saying, "Let her be. She got a right to be different. She gonna stumble on herself one of these days. Just let the child be, and I be, Mama."
Sonia Sanchez wrote poetry throughout elementary and high school, then took classes in creative writing at New York University. She earned her living teaching and became active in the civil rights movement of the 1960s.
I was part of that group with New York Core, you see, where we're just very stringent. You know what I'm saying? We were the people that went out to Long Island to make sure that the apartments in Long Island became integrated. The Riverside Drive became integrated. And the counters, even in New York City, they would hire people.
So was it the civil rights movement that then launched you on a lifetime of activism?
It was that, and also hearing a man by the name of Malcolm. We were in New York Core, and Malcolm sent a directive out. Our offices were on 125th Street there, and we always had these demonstrations with Core about housing, about something, whatever. And then a directive came from Malcolm that said, you cannot have these demonstrations unless you invite me. So we thought at the time, I'm not a revisionist, so I don't go around saying we always knew who Malcolm was. So we said, oh God, that man, he's a racist. I mean, oh, terrible. So of course we stood around in the office saying, isn't this terrible? But we knew that he had to be invited. So Malcolm was included into this arena of, in quotes, civil rights people.
What did you learn about language from listening to Malcolm?
We learned how to be very direct with our poetry, I think. We learned, because he was always very direct with people, but he was always willing to give people different images of themselves also, too. So one of the things we learned is that we had to make people look at themselves, face themselves squarely. One of the things that Malcolm gave to the country is that he gave a lot of truth to the country. And he spoke aloud what a lot of African-American people were thinking. We used to say it behind closed doors, but Malcolm said it on televisions and on the streets of America. And you found people then getting up the next day, going downtown, wherever they were going, feeling very good about themselves, walking up straight, going into the job force, going into classrooms, going into schools, going into work, whatever, saying simply, I'm a little taller, I'm walking somewhat taller now. But above all, I think in terms of the poetry, he gave us that direct image of ourselves, that an image of like, you are indeed worthwhile, you are indeed beautiful, not in some strange, far flung fashion, but a sense of like, you are beautiful in that you have a history of that beauty, that you have a tradition of that beauty, and an ability also too. So when you listen to Malcolm, you believe you could do anything or be anyone, period. So we learned how to begin our delivery also too. We imitated him a great deal. So when we began to read our poetry on the stages of America, we understood fully that we had to engage an audience the way he had engaged an audience, with the rapid delivery, but also with humor. Malcolm always used humor, and so he made people laugh at themselves as a people, but he would bring you full circle again. So I began to, and many of the other writers began to employ humor in what we said. I mean, if you could, like, in a sense, bring humor into a conversation, then you had an audience, eating out of your hands, actually. So we learned how to do that also, too. We learned how to become expansive on the stage and walk a poem. Instead of getting up on stage and just standing in one spot, we would cover an entire stage as a consequence of that. So the audience would move with you, and so therefore you could then come back and then center your audience when you got ready to say something very special, and the audience, their eyes were glued on you. So they never left you. They always stayed with you. You moved them to the right, to the left, and then center stage again, and you had them actually. So he was a great teacher.
We are here because these are serious times, times that will ask us all to put away our preconceived notions of each other, to stretch our minds, souls, to embrace the differences and similarities of all progressive people who want to return the earth to those who will not exploit the people and the earth for material gains. We are here because if we are to live, we must organize and work and walk in solidarity to return the world from the inhumanitarians to the humanitarians. We are here because Africans and Latinos and Asians and Native Americans are starving and dying in Somalia, Uganda, El Salvador, Ethiopia, the Cameroons, Mississippi, Nicaragua, Harlem, the reservations, refugees all. We are here because every 3 days, 120,000 children die of starvation or the effects of starvation. We are here because of the children of Atlanta, the rise of racism on college campuses, the detention of young brothers and sisters in South Africa. Listen to their cries, my brothers and sisters. Ah, mama, 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 baba. Baba, 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 they have me in this detention center and I am hurt. They are hurting me and all I wanted to do was to march against anti-apartheid. Oh, mama, mama, Baba, Baba, come, help me. They have buried my comrades here in the jail and nobody knows. They are killing me and all I wanted to do is march and I'm only 13 and 14 and 15 and 16 and all I wanted to do was to march. Ah, mama, mamacita, mamacita. They've come to the village and they said they were bringing peace and they are raping me and I heard, mama, I heard, please, somebody, come and help me. I'm in Philadelphia.
I get up in the morning and I exercise, I meditate. I try to say I want to go outside and greet people in peace. All the while thinking about the day, how am I going to greet the day? And I think that's one of the things that I attempt to do. I attempt to wear my days well. And I want people to learn how to wear their days well also.
You've gotten so much acclaim now and so many honors. Has your life now gotten to a more relaxed stage?
if you can say living, teaching, and traveling, and being, and constantly, you know, it's not easy to challenge this country, you know, and the world. I mean, you put awards in proper place. When people give it, an organization, you say, I thank you for that, you know. I thank you for people like my stepmother, Jerry, who never got an award for doing anything in her life, you know, and she died of cancer. And maybe I hadn't told her how important she was to me at all. They're ordinary people who live ordinary lives in our times, and they don't feel appreciated. And so you say, hey, when they come up to you and hug you and say, you make me get through these hours, or you make my life mean something, you are doing this for me, then I understand why I write.
W.H. Auden said, poetry makes nothing happen. What do you think poetry can do?
Well, you find people who will say, I hold on, or you change my life, or you make me do things, or you make me challenge, or you make me engage, and even probably more via the books than sometimes the teaching, because I have a limited amount of people I teach, you see. The books, I get letters from people from Norway, people from every place who will say things like, you know, I read this and I've had the same experience and I thank you for it and you're right, we must do the following, whatever, you know. The one time I saw my children become concerned about where I was going to read when we were traveling to Norway. And they said, but will they understand you? And I said, you mean the language? They said, no. They would speak English. No. Will they understand what they meant to say? My experience seemingly was so alien from their experience there. But I told them the great thing about poetry is that I bring this African-American experience and put it up on the world stage. And then people from the world taste it and say, I felt this. I understand that experience. And so that's why poetry is so universal, because I don't have to become Irish to understand Yeats, you know, but I do understand his work and love his work, okay? If that's what I'm finally talking about, I don't have to become, you know, Spanish to understand Guillen, you know, but I do understand this Cuban man's poetry because I've had a similar experience, whatever. You see, effecting change is not like giving all the line, like, you know, down with this and down with that. A lot of what we did early on when we began to come into politics, whatever, it is then how do you humanize people, you see? Because one of the effects of society or a country can be. If you can oppress people so thoroughly that you dehumanize them, then they'll never know what it means to be human beings, and then will demand what a human being must demand, you see. So it is to humanize people, to say, you're a human being, so you must have all the things human beings require. So let us not organize for those kinds of things. So you've got to give them human things, to keep them human at a time that inhumanity creeps into our marrow and our toe jam and our skulls that will make us treat each other in such a damnable fashion, if that makes sense. Song number 2, 1. I say, all you young girls waiting to live, I say, all you young girls taking your pill, I say, all you sisters tired of standing still, I say, all you sisters thinking you won't but you will. Don't let them kill you with their stare. Don't let them closet you with no air. Don't let them feed you sex piecemeal. Don't let them offer you any ordeal. I say, step back, sisters. We're rising from the dead. I say, step back, Johnnies. We're dancing on our heads. I say, step back, man. No more hanging by a thread. I say, step back, world. Can't let it all go unsaid, too. I say, all you young girls molested at 10. I say, all you young girls giving it up again and again. I say, all you sisters hanging out in every den. I say, all you sisters needing your own oxygen. Don't let them trap you with their coke. Don't let them treat you like one fat joke. Don't let them bleed you till you broke. Don't let them blind you in masculine smoke. I say, step back, sisters. We're rising from the dead. I say, step back, Johnnies. We're dancing on our heads. I say, step back, man. No more hanging by a thread. I say, step back, world. Can't let it all go unsaid. I say, step back, world. Can't let it all go unsaid.
This program was made possible by grants from the Pew Charitable Trusts, Essence Communications, the literature programs of the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
This is PBS.